Hello, Haunted family. Welcome back to another episode. Once again, no real overall theme, just a few stories that I found interesting and that I hope you also find interesting. One of the stories actually features a location that my podcast co-host, Holly, and I actually visited several years ago for my birthday. I hope you enjoy the show. On November 30th, 1998, myself and two friends witnessed a number of paranormal occurrences while ghost hunting at Waverly Hills TB Sanatorium in Louisville, Kentucky. I had several different rumors about the place since I was in 10th grade and was determined to find out for myself. This place is huge, and there are other buildings, but the main hospital is where there have been the most sightings and noises and other things reported. It was closed by the state in 1961 and reopened as a nursing home, but was once again closed in 1980, allegedly because of poor treatment and abuse of the patients. We arrived there around 9 p.m., and were in the building for about 15 minutes. This place is totally isolated. We finally got to the top of the hill and walked into the front. Now, when I saw this place, I stood in disbelief, because the place looks scary and creepy and eerie just from the outside, like it's set up for a horror movie or something. It's unbelievable. I started having second thoughts about even going into the place. I felt like I was walking into a horror movie. After we walked in through one of the many entrances that stand wide open, I could tell that something was unsettled in this place. I just felt like if I turned around, something would be following us. The atmosphere completely changed. We walked through the hallways and went into rooms that once held patients. We could see scratch marks all over the doors and walls. When we got to the basement, we saw bloodstains. No more than a second after we saw the bloodstains, we heard footsteps upstairs. For about 30 to 40 seconds. We ignored the sounds and headed towards the door in hopes of escaping to the outside, only to find a long tunnel that we could see down maybe 15 feet. We walked in and walked for about 6 or 7 minutes. We ended up stopping for a smoke and huddled up after we heard footsteps and scuffling noises behind us. We decided to get back up to the first floor and then leave. We got to the top of the stairs and finally found our way out. We were taking pictures of the outside when my friend saw what we had originally came to find. In the third floor window, the fifth window on the right side of the building, we saw a young female child just staring at us. I would say that this place is definitely looking into and investigating if you're interested in the paranormal. It is definitely haunted. I worked as a museum curator at a historic site for a number of years. The site was the ancestral home of one family for over 250 years. I had access to all areas of the 30-room mansion. These were some of my experiences. During the fall, when we were no longer open to the public, I'd be alone in the house vacuuming and cleaning and making it ready for the close season. I'd bring a radio in with me to keep me company. One day I went outside for a break, leaving the radio on. When I went back inside, the radio was off, and the plug was removed from the outlet. I was the only one on the site that day, and I always locked myself inside the house to clean. One year, a cataloger was working on the computer in the back storage room. She was the only one in the house. I was working in an outbuilding next to the house. I heard a loud slam from the screen door of the side porch and looked to see the girl running towards me. Her hair was standing straight up. She said that she couldn't work in the house that day. She had heard a woman humming a song and got this strange feeling all over her. She asked me to go back in the house with her. We went towards the screen door that she had just run out of and observed that it had been latched from the inside of the house. We entered through the main door of the house, walked to the side porch that she had exited, and the wooden door to the little side porch was not only closed, but bolted shut. Once again, no one else was in the house that day, nor on the site except for the two of us. While opening the house one morning, raising over 40 window shades and opening designated doors, I was in the 1930s wing of the house when I heard a door open from the main part of the house, and distinct footsteps walking matter-of-factly through the gun room 2 rooms behind me. I said good morning, thinking it was a co-worker who was scheduled to work, but there was no response. I got a strange feeling and mustered up the courage to go through the gun room and through 5 other rooms and out the door of the house. I walked down to the parking lot, and there was no cars other than my own. I was alone at the site again. Another morning, while opening the house, I was again in the 1930s section of the house, when I thought to myself, what would happen if I went out through the new kitchen exit porch and the latch was locked on the outside? I couldn't get out. That was just one of those subconscious thoughts, when then it actually happened. Luckily, a coworker was outside to let me out. Late one summer morning, I went into the house to use the staff bathroom, which was a door located at the end of the visitors' reception room. It was a weekday, and we were closed to the public. As I was in the bathroom, I heard the reception room door open, footsteps walk up to the bathroom door, and 2 sharp knocks at the bathroom door. Just a minute, I said, and there was no answer. I heard a noise from the floor above me, where the catalogers were working. It sounded as if they were pushing something, perhaps a chair or a trunk, across the floor. I went upstairs and asked them if they were moving something. No, they replied. They were just writing paperwork. I asked if either of them had knocked on the bathroom door, and again they both replied no. They hadn't heard the reception room door open at all, which they had been trained to listen for. I never really believed in anything paranormal, but this next story changed my mind. I was working in an outbuilding, which was used as an office. We were open to the public and had staff of 4 giving house tours. During the afternoon, one of the tour guides came in and said she had 2 psychic visitors, and they had questions for me. The tour guide told me that during her tour, one of the women had placed her hands over the roped-off doorway of the north wing bedroom, and she observed the eye hooks embedded in the doorway turn a full circle without the woman touching them. The psychic said that she saw a spirit in the north wing, but he wasn't the popular namesake of the site. She said that she recognized the spirit from the family photographs in the reception room. I went back into the reception room with the 2 psychics, and one of the women walked right over to the photograph of a gentleman who built the north wing. The intriguing part of this was the fact that the psychics warned us that we would experience chaos that afternoon, but not to worry, as it would not be earth-shattering. They explained that, with their presence, they have disrupted the spirit's plane. Anyone coming within 5 feet of the house would be affected. Well, let me tell you what happened. From 2:30 to 4 p.m., I observed a group of visitors in the house walking around all over the rooms, not staying together, touching furniture and objects, tour guides yelling at them. These were events I had never seen in my 10 years there. Law enforcement rangers documenting vandalism in the historic cemetery. A group of 50 severely mentally disturbed patients arriving and moaning loudly on the front lawn. The front lawn is the size of a football field. People trying to open windows from the outside, knocking on different exterior doors trying to get in. Mind you, we had an entrance sign posted at the reception room door, which was acknowledged any other day. Some of my former co-workers will attest to these happenings. The staunch and pompous law enforcement ranger, who was my former clueless boss, didn't believe in himself or anything else. He's still there, and he hates people. He believes that if these happenings were made public, that we would have every kook in creation over here with metal detectors and paranormal crap. My name is Bill, and I live in a small town in the South where strange things are often seen and heard. I have a story that still puts chills all over me every time I tell it, and those chills are there now. My story starts when I was 5 or 6, and it involves me and my older brother. We have 2 older brothers, but this story only involves us. My older brother, Norman, was asked to take the scraps out one night, right after supper. It was a normal routine for each of us, but on that night it would change his life forever. He walked outside to empty the scraps, and that's when this whole thing began. When he got to the spot where we'd dumped the scraps, he noticed a pair of green eyes. He didn't pay much attention, considering that we did have dogs and cats. So he continued. After he was done, they were still there, but this time they were looking at him, with a squint to them. He started calling all of the dogs and cats' names. None of them responded, and that really took him by surprise. especially with it being time for them to eat. He noticed that the eyes was all he could see, and he got scared at that point. As he looked closer, this thing smiled at him, and at that point, he threw the pot at it and ran back into the house to tell us what had happened. We all laughed and went about our business, but I could tell that he was telling the truth. That was the first, but still not the last of old Green Eyes. As the years went by, things got worse for him. This thing was taking over every part of my brother's life. It would lock doors on him, wake him up in the middle of the night by breathing heavy on his face. As the years went by, I started witnessing these things, like the doors locking and unlocking, the TV turning on and off and changing channels, lights going on and off. One night I couldn't sleep, so he got on the top bunk with me and told me to go to sleep. It worked until I woke up and looked at him. His hair was moving like a fan was blowing air on his face. I woke him up and told him what I saw, and he just laughed and said that it happens to him all the time. One part of this whole ordeal that always be in my mind happened when I was about 7. We were all out playing, and we made him mad. So he went to our eldest brother's room and went to sleep. When it turned dark, we all went back to watch TV. My mom, Dad, and the rest of us were watching a movie when he called for me in the bedroom. The tone of his voice let me know that he was scared. Bad. He didn't scream at me. It was more that he could barely get it out. You know, like it took all of his effort just to say my name. I was about 30 feet from his room, in the living room, and the hall led straight to his room. I was afraid to even look down the hall. The funny thing was, nobody heard him but me. He asked me again to come into the room, and to hurry. I was scared, but I proceeded down the hall. When I got close, the door was opening. I was scared to go in. He said, "Get in here. It is in front of the bed. I want you to see it." At this point, I was frozen, and as I turned and looked through the door, I caught the expression on his face. I screamed at the top of my lungs. Our whole family came down the hall, pushed me out of the way, and by the time they got to him, he was in shock. I'll never forget it. His face was blue from holding his breath. My dad slapped him in the face to get him to breathe again. Dad looked at us with pure terror in his eyes. He could not believe that something could put this much fear into somebody. He held him down all night so he could sleep, knowing that he was okay. Things did get worse, because soon it started happening to me. The only time that I ever saw it was in my bedroom. It had large green eyes, and they were squinted. At one point it would call out your name when you were alone, even in daylight. A few years later, he got married and moved into a trailer about 50 yards away. At this point in time, he was moving out of his bedroom, which at this time was only a few years old, from an addition. I wanted a new room, but his was the one I really didn't want to be in at all, because of all the things that I heard and seen by him in there. I did move into it for a time. When he moved out, things were fine for about 6 months for him. The only reason was that this thing turned its attention on me. I knew that I was in trouble. The same things that he was hearing, I started hearing. My name was called, lights turned on and off, the TV turned on and off, even when other people was in the room with me. I would have friends over, and they wouldn't even know of the occurrences, and they would wake me up in terror and ask me all these things, and I would tell them the story. Many of our family members experienced these things as well. Soon, it turned its sights back on him. This time it was stronger. It would actually wake him up and be on top of him. At one point, it told him that it was back, and that it was stronger, and that it was his house, and for him to leave. A few years later, enough was enough. They called a priest to come and bless the house, and he agreed to do so. I remember that day well, because at that point, I had got married and had a son. I lived close to him. He had 2 kids at this point, which at times would play with the friend that was not actually there. So he summoned the priest, and I stayed at home that day just to see what would happen. I did not go in. Instead, I stayed outside. After they came out, the priest said another prayer and left quickly. Then my brother told me what had happened. The priest had just made it through the door when he turned to my brother and his wife and said, "Do you feel that?" My brother was scared. Although he had lived with this for several years, to see the priest's face turn pale was overwhelming for him. When they got to the kitchen, the priest stopped and told them not to move because he was in the room with them. The priest started sweating and praying and told my brother, "This is not a spirit. It was the devil himself. He fought with this thing spiritually. and the room got very cold. And that's when the priest said that it was running to the back room. They all ran to the back room, where the priest cornered it in the left side of the closet. After it was all done, he spoke with my brother and told him that he could not guarantee the spirit would not come back. But he did say that if it did, it would be twice as bad. Things were fine for about a year. Then, out of the blue, it was back. Once he was working on the water line under the sink in the kitchen when something started rubbing his back. He thought nothing of it and kept working. It started again. He thought it was his wife, so he turned around, and nothing was there. And, at that point, he knew it was back. He ran and yelled for his wife and found her in the bedroom, where she said she had been for about 45 minutes. She didn't hear him screaming until he opened the door. On one occasion, he saw a little girl run through the living room and vanish into a bedroom, not to be found. If I told you all of the occurrences that had happened over the years, it would be a book. The last time he said it had bothered him was about a month ago, when he was sitting at the table with his wife. They were talking, and a glass from on top of the refrigerator was lifted and floated across the room, within inches of them, and placed on the floor in front of the door. They just looked at each other and said, "Did you see that?" They have become used to these things happening, and friends and family have also experienced these things while at their house. Over the years, he has showed me bruises on his arms, throat, legs, where he has been grabbed, and one night it picked him up by the ankles and dangled him over his wife until she woke up and he fell on top of her. After all these years of evil that he has seen, it has slowly taken over his life, although he refuses to believe that. For the past few years, he has turned evil himself, disowning his family, picking fights over nothing, lashing out at everyone over simple things. I love my brother, and I know that this thing has a hold on him and is taking control. Although this was a very strange and frightening experience, I'm not sure of the exact day and date of which it happened, except that it was in September of 1995. I have not spoke to anyone about this since it happened, other than my friend, and I must admit, I'm a bit uncomfortable just writing it. But maybe this will help me deal with my experience better. I still think about it on a day-to-day basis. I was a security officer at an old hospital in Massachusetts, which was purchased by the state and had several abandoned floors and wings. The hospital contained a detox unit, a court-ordered program for convicted drunk driving offenses, and, of all the things that go along with these programs, a unit for people who suffered from respiratory difficulties. We were required to do patrols throughout all the areas of the hospital, interior and exterior, and even check the floors and wings that had not been in service for years. I had been working in the hospital for about 4 months at this time, on an overnight shift, and although I was always slightly wary of checking these vacant floors, which were in semi-darkness at the time, I tried to put my fears out of my head. There were 2 of us on during the midnight shift. I think it was either 2 or 3 in the morning. It was my turn to do rounds. I started the way I always do, working from the 6th floor down. I finally began to check the 2nd floor, which, at one time, was a wing to treat terminally ill patients. I knew that's what it was used for, but I never really thought anything of it. I checked the floor from one end to the other, checked all the rooms, and the old office behind the nurse's station. All was clear. I started making my way back towards the elevator to go to the 1st floor. I heard the sound of voices. I could not make out whether it was 2 or 3, but they were without a doubt coming from not very far down the hall that I had just checked. The first thing that came to my mind was that these were detox clients who had somehow gotten off their unit, past the detox staff, and made their way down to the 2nd floor, and were fooling around, possibly hiding in one of the closets in one of the rooms I had just checked. I listened very intently to be sure of myself. I could clearly hear voices. The strange thing was that they sounded like they were just voices, which could be heard very clearly, but there was no words, just voices. I called out down the hall for whoever it was to step out of the room and into the hallway. I got no response at this request. I called out again. Still no response. But the voices were still there. I used my radio to contact my partner and alert her that I had a trespass situation on the 2nd floor, as this is what I thought I was dealing with, and I needed her assistance. The response I got back over the radio came back broken up and nearly inaudible. To me, personally, that was no surprise. This was a typical occurrence with our communication system. But I was sure I'd gotten a response out to her, as I thought I heard her voice through all the crackling and interference. I began to make my way down the hall, thinking without a doubt that I was dealing with detox clients. I called out again for whoever it was to step out into the hallway. That's when I noticed the temperature suddenly drop in the hallway that was just warm a few seconds ago, due to the fact that it was a warm September night. And although in the back of my mind I knew it was there, it finally hit me that a crackling sound was coming over my radio, even though I had not hit the button to transmit. I tried once again to contact my partner over the radio, knowing full well that if she had heard me the first time, she would have been there by now. But the crackling and interference continued over the radio, whether I hit the button to transmit or not. At that point, I could feel something was just not right. But I tried to tell myself that this was just a couple of people who had wandered into the hospital's old out-of-service unit. I noticed at this time that the voices had gotten louder and the hallway had gotten colder. All I could think about was getting off the floor into the elevator or the stairwell. The stairway was closer to me, so I turned and began searching for my keys to unlock the door. The voices were louder now and more persistent. I could clearly hear footsteps along with them, not coming from one direction of the hallway, but all directions. The voices started coming from all directions. And that's when I fell to the floor, which was ice cold, just as cold as putting your hand on a steel fence outside in the dead of winter. I wanted to push myself away from the floor as soon as I touched it, but I didn't. I didn't have the energy to do so. All I could hear was the voices, but I still could not make out what was being said, and the footsteps were growing louder. I was on my hands and knees, looking at the floor. I struggled to hold my head up, just so I could find the door to the stairs. But what instead caught my attention was what looked like several people walking around me. I couldn't make out what they looked like, or whether they were male or female, as they had no faces, no type of clothing that I could see. They simply looked like wrinkles and blurs in the air, with a basic human shape, walking all around me in the dimly lit hallway. It was then that one of these shapes walked towards me, as I was still on my hands and knees, and then walked right through me. At that point, I had severe difficulty breathing, and seemed to lose even more control of myself physically than I already had. I struggled painfully to get air into my lungs, and then forced it out. After repeating this process several times, I noticed a funny taste in my mouth, and then I noticed several small puddles of blood on the floor, which I was exhaling with the air. It was then that I panicked and forced myself to the stairwell door with every ounce of strength I had, which was not much. And when I almost had myself standing, I fell to the floor again. I was really beginning to lose control of myself at that point, due to the fact that I was very scared, and I don't know if the people always felt this way in ghostly encounters, but I thought I was going to die. I was still having difficulty breathing, still had blood coming up from my throat. I was also shaking uncontrollably, and it was a struggle to regain control of myself. The hallway was still very active with voices and footsteps and blurry images, which continued to wander up and down the unit. I tried once again for my keys and practically crawled to the stairwell door. My hand touched the doorknob, which, even though I was already cold, was absolutely freezing, almost stingingly painful to touch. I grabbed for my keys, the whole time thinking that it was so cold that the lock may be frozen. I managed to control my shaking just long enough to get the key into the lock and turn it. I fell through the door, out of the unit into the stairwell, crawling from the hallway into the stairs. The door finally closed once I got my legs out of the way, and the warm air of the dimly lit stairwell hit me almost immediately. I could feel my energy coming back. If this phenomenon was still going on behind the door I had just exited, I didn't care one bit. I wanted to get as far away from it as I could. I grabbed the railing for support and walked myself, still quite shaken, down the stairs to the first floor and into the bathroom. I was breathing easier now, but was coughing heavily. I made my way to the toilet and coughed up several clots of blood. When I was done, I checked myself out in the mirror. My eyes were glassy and bloodshot. My skin was very pale, and for a guy who was freezing his rear off a few minutes ago, I was sweating like a pig. I splashed some cold water on my face, toweled off, and tried to compose myself the best I could, and then made my way down to the security office, where my partner immediately noticed that I wasn't back in the same condition that I had left. She questioned me on why it took so long on my patrol, at which point I realized she did not get my transmission over the radio. And when I asked her about it, she stated that she had her radio with her the whole time, and not once did she receive a transmission from me. I used the excuse of illness for the reason why the patrol took so long. I further stated that I thought that I should probably go home. A replacement was called for me, and I left immediately upon his arrival. I arrived home and sat in my living room trying to make sense of what had happened, but I just couldn't. I never spoke a word of this to my fiancé, my co-workers on that job, or even the one I have now, or any of my friends until last night. I still don't fully understand what happened that morning. Although I was apparently hurt physically, I don't think it was done intentionally, by whatever it was. I had been on that floor several times before and never encountered anything like what I came face to face with then, or anywhere else in that hospital for that matter. I think I may have just been up there at the wrong time, or my presence there set something off. There is not a day that goes by that I don't think about what happened. I never spoke about it because, like a lot of other people who has been in this situation, I feel that nobody else would believe me, or they would think I was crazy. I was very scared at the time, but looking back on it now, it really was truly frightening, but an interesting experience. I actually hope to have another encounter without the same side effects sometime in the future.